Okay, let's unpack this. The question, what is art? It sounds simple, maybe, but it's way more complicated than just, a trip to the museum.
Oh, absolutely. It's a real philosophical minefield.
And it turns out it's actually this profound window into, well, human physiology, psychology, even our cognitive limits.
It really is. Today we're diving into material that kind of forces us to stop treating art as just some static category
Right.
and start seeing it as like a dynamic artifact of human consciousness itself. We're pulling from some deep wells here: neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, even evolutionary history.
We want to understand why we create these illusions, why we respond to them so powerfully.
And crucially, why our own brains might be inherently incapable of finding objective truth, yet somehow thrive on these really profound aesthetic experiences.
So our mission for you, the listener, isn't really to settle on one single final definition of what's good art or real art. Because honestly,
Centuries of thinkers haven't managed it.
exactly, the world's greatest minds have failed to lock that down. So instead, the goal is more about developing a highly informed personal opinion.
By understanding the neurological stuff, the cognitive frameworks that make your own subjective experience of art so complex and, yeah, so valuable.
You want to know not just what art is, but maybe why the human brain seems to, well, need it.
And that difficulty in defining art, that's actually the perfect place to start this deep dive.
It really is.
Because if you try to nail down some single objective essence, like one universal quality that all art must have,
It never quite works, does it?
every single account falls short, inevitably. Any definition based on, say, visual criteria, it immediately fails when you think about music or poetry.
Yeah, good point. Historically, those earliest philosophical accounts, they tried to anchor art in external things, right?
Yeah.
Like beauty, form, imitation.
That's right. You've got Plato viewing art as mimesis, imitation, which he wasn't always thrilled about, sometimes seeing it as just a copy of a copy.
A shadow of reality.
Exactly. Then Aristotle came along and refined that a bit, focusing more on harmony, proportion, catharsis, that emotional release.
And their whole tradition sort of leads up to Immanuel Kant, doesn't it?
Kant's contribution was absolutely essential. He brought in this idea of disinterested pleasure.
Disinterested pleasure. Okay, what does that mean exactly?
Well, before Kant, appreciating art was often tangled up with its usefulness, right? Or its moral value. A beautiful object might be useful, or a painting might be morally uplifting.
Okay.
Kant suggested that true aesthetic appreciation is disinterested, meaning we appreciate the object purely for its own sake. We're not thinking about whether we want to own it or if the scene depicted is morally good.
It's independent of any practical desire or moral judgment.
Precisely. You enjoy the form of the painting, let's say, not because you want the thing in the painting, but because of the pure contemplative act it inspires. Just looking.
But then things shift.
Right.
By the 19th century, the focus starts moving away from form.
And towards internal experience.
Yeah.
Specifically feeling and communication.
Like Leo Tolstoy.
Tolstoy's a great example. He famously rejected definitions based just on beauty. He argued that art's whole purpose was about transmitting genuine feelings from the artist to the audience.
Connecting people through shared emotion.
Exactly. And then R.G. Collingwood sort of expanded on that. He suggested art's purpose was less about just transmitting feelings and maybe more about clarifying them.
Clarifying. How so?
He believed the artist takes these maybe vague, unformed, even troubling emotions, and through the process of making the art, clarifies them, first for themselves and then through the work for the audience. The art object becomes this crystallizing point for complex feelings.
Okay, that makes sense. But then you get the formalists pushing back, right? People like Clive Bell, Monroe Beardsley.
Oh yeah, powerful counter push. They argued essentially that what mattered wasn't the subject matter, wasn't the artist's feelings or intent.
It was the significant form.
Exactly. The arrangement of colors, lines, shapes.
Yeah.
That's what generates a pure aesthetic response, totally independent of, sentimentality or story.
And later thinkers like Suzanne Langer, she talked about art as a kind of symbolic language.
Right. Capable of communicating ideas and feelings that normal words or logic just can't capture. It operates on a different frequency almost.
And then if you bring in anthropology and psychology.
Oh, the definition just explodes even further. Nelson Goodman saw art as just one type of complex symbolic system, like scientific diagrams or music notation.
Then Clifford Geertz viewed it as a cultural text.
Yeah, basically a way for a community to express and negotiate its deepest values. And then you look at evolution. Steven Pinker controversially suggested art is just a psychological byproduct.
It's like a side effect.
Yeah, a pleasurable side effect of our brain-loving patterns. But then Ellen Desaniak argued the opposite, that it was an evolved, essential practice tied to ritual group bonding necessary for societies to stick together.
Wow. Okay, so the definition clearly migrated.
Yeah.
From these sort of fixed external things like beauty.
Towards more fluid, subjective experiences like meaning and connection.
But the late 20th century really delivered the knockout blow to finding one single definition, didn't it? With institutional theory.
That's where Arthur Danto and George Dickey come in. And this is huge. They fundamentally argued that art depends not on what it inherently is. It doesn't need to be beautiful or well-crafted or even emotionally expressive.
So what does it depend on?
Its place. Its place within the art world. Its status is granted by the institutions, the galleries, the museums, the critics, the curators, the whole context.
The classic examples really hammer this home, don't they? Marcel Duchamp's fountain.
A mass-produced urinal.
Signed, put in a gallery.
Mm-hmm.
If art has to be beautiful or skillfully made, that just fails completely.
Totally. Or Andy Warhol's Brillo boxes. You literally can't tell them apart from the real Surtpad boxes in the supermarket.
So these works forced the art world to admit that the power of context, that institutional frame, could basically turn an everyday object into a philosophical statement.
Exactly. And Danto's implication is fascinating. If the artwork looks exactly like a non-art object, then the art part isn't in the object itself. It's where?
It's entirely in the concept, the idea, the context surrounding it. The physical thing is just the vehicle.
And that's pretty much where philosophical consensus landed, right? They mostly gave up trying to find one single objective definition.
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
The philosopher Morris Weitz called art an open concept, always evolving, impossible to pin down.
And Barry Scott's cluster concept seems like maybe the most practical way to think about it now.
I think so.
Mm.
Gott suggested art has this family of recognizable traits, things like beauty, expression, creativity, formal qualities, the usual suspects.
Mm-hmm.
But a work doesn't need all of them. It just needs to display some of those traits to be recognized as art. It's more like a spectrum or a chinlist where you only need a few boxes ticked.
So if we take that seriously, maybe a really creative doodle, even if it doesn't give you much aesthetic pleasure, it could still count because creativity is in the cluster.
Exactly. That flexibility acknowledges that the status of art is often fluid, it's negotiated, it's not set in stone. Which I guess brings us back to you, the listener. If the academic definition is this subjective, this changeable,
then worrying about whether that blockbuster movie you loved or that street mural you connected with qualifies as capital A art.
it's kind of beside the point, isn't it?
Totally. If you engaged with it, if it changed how you felt, if you got value from it.
Yeah.
The academic label doesn't really change that experience.
And that personal subjective value, that's precisely what we need to examine next. Because understanding that forces us to look inside the observer, inside the brain itself.
Right. To really get art's power, we have to shift gears, move away from defining the object.
And start analyzing the observer's brain. We need to understand the fundamental, evolved operating system of how humans perceive things.
That's the critical pivot, because art isn't some separate thing from daily life. It's actually an extension of our normal, evolved, and often irrational ways of thinking.
Our aesthetic taste, our biases, our reliance on illusions, it uses all of that.
To communicate profound meaning that goes beyond strict logic. So to grasp that, we have to accept the brain for what it fundamentally is.
Which is?
A sensory information processor, but one that's optimized for function, for getting by, not necessarily for finding absolute objective fact.
And if objective truth is the goal, then this processor is inherently flawed.
Deeply flawed. In that sense, you don't perceive the world directly as it is. Your brain constructs a model of reality.
Like a simulation.
Sort of, yeah. A constantly updated, often distorted, translated version. And it's optimized for speedy judgment based on limited information. We are basically guessing machines.
Constantly living in a state of ambiguity. That's a key idea here.
Absolutely. Whether you're looking at a painting or just a person across the room, you never have all the data. Things are hidden by light, by shadow, information is missing.
Or just unknowable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the brain has to operate in that void. And it doesn't wait for proof, does it?
No, it jumps to conclusions.
It picks the explanation that best fits its existing expectations. It relies on mental shortcuts, intuition, which inevitably introduces arbitrariness, bias, error into the system.
And we can actually prove this bias.
Right.
using simple visual illusions.
Oh, yeah, rigorously. Take the classic changing tone bar illusion. You have a gray bar across a gradient background.
And it looks lighter on one end and darker on the other, even though it isn't.
Right. Your rational conscious mind knows the bar is one solid color. You can measure it. But your eyes, your perception, continues to defy that knowledge. It still looks like it changes.
And that is the crucial insight, isn't it? The source material really emphasizes this. These illusions prove that our rational conscious mind, Kahneman System 2, it just cannot override these automatic unconscious misperceptions.
Exactly. The brain seems to have these specialized compartments that form perceptions like judging brightness based on surrounding contrast, totally independently of our conscious knowledge.
You could stare at that illusion for an hour, fully understand the physics, the optics.
And it will still trick you. The knowledge doesn't penetrate that automatic processing level.
Which leads straight to this core realization about our cognitive architecture.
That the human brain evolved primarily for survival, not for finding objective truth. That's the so-called design flaw that art exploits so brilliantly.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Explain that survival versus truth trade-off.
Well, think about it. If you hear a sudden rustle in the bushes or see a large, unidentified shape moving quickly towards you,
You don't stop to analyze.
the last thing you should do is pause, gather all the facts, measure the trajectory, logically assess the threat level.
Or you'd be a lunch.
Exactly. Your self-preservation instinct, that fast subconscious System 1 response, is to flee or fight immediately. The brain is designed to err on the side of safety.
And that word err is key. It admits that finding the actual truth is often secondary or even inhibited for the sake of functional speed.
And sometimes objective truth can actually be detrimental to function. The brain has limited processing power. Trying to process too much information, even too many truths, can lead to paralysis.
Like trying to cross a busy street while consciously identifying the truth of every single car, person, lamppost.
You'd never make it across. You have to ignore things, suppress information, just to achieve a simple goal. Consciously and unconsciously, we're filtering constantly.
And sometimes relying on a false belief is actually necessary for success. The material gives some powerful examples here.
Like the placebo effect. That's a huge one. The patient gets better, measurably better, because they falsely believe an inactive pill is powerful medicine.
The belief itself causes the change.
Or the student whose parents didn't tell her about her cat dying until after her final exams.
Right, because the truth, the knowledge would have caused stress, distraction.
And likely hindered her performance. The temporary functional false belief, or at least the lack of the true upsetting information, was essential for her to do well. Knowledge would have gotten in the way.
So we see this need for, well, sometimes arbitrary rules or functional beliefs everywhere. And the person has to have faith in them for them to work.
Which leads us straight into the deep work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky on irrational decision-making. The two systems of thinking.
System 1 and System 2.
System 1, fast. That's the intuitive, emotional, automatic, bias-prone system. It handles gut reactions, those rapid aesthetic judgments that actually guide most of our lives.
Big life decisions too, right? Who to trust, where to live, what movie to see.
Absolutely. You can't make those choices purely through slow, logical calculation. And critically, the research suggests something like 95% of all our decisions are made unconsciously by this fast emotional system.
95%. So that leaves the slower, analytical, logical System 2. Slow, doing what?
Often just playing catch-up. It frequently gets tasked with creating a false cover story.
The cover story.
Yeah, it invents rational-sounding reasons to justify choices that were already made emotionally and intuitively by System 1.
So we think we're being logical, but we're just justifying our gut feeling after the fact.
Very often, yes. As Kahneman noted, it reveals this massive potential for self-deception. He said something like, if humans think that humans have reasons for what humans believe, that is often a mistake. Human beliefs and human wishes and human hopes are not always anchored in reasons.
Wow. We feel the need to justify, but the justification might just be window dressing.
It often comes after the decision is basically locked in by System 1.
So the philosophical implication here is huge. When we move beyond simple stuff and into complex areas like art, philosophy, morality, theology.
Our reliance on these functional misperceptions, these blind spots, ambiguity, cognitive illusions, it makes it essentially impossible for us humans to achieve objective, universal knowledge in those realms.
The brain is just structured to prefer a story that makes sense, that feels coherent and functional.
even if it's not factually accurate. It prefers that over a messy, slow, chaotic reality. #tag3, art and the architecture of illusion.
Okay, so if the brain is wired like that, prioritizing a fast, coherent guess over a complex, maybe slow, truth.
Then art steps right into that gap. It uses that exact architecture to create profound meaning. Art isn't just an illusion, it's like the masterclass in exploiting our cognitive biases.
It's entirely built on the mental lifting the observer has to do. Think about the raw materials. A great painting.
And just colored pigments smeared on a flat surface.
A film.
Sequential still images, flickering light.
Yet our mind instantly, automatically transforms these simple things into vivid, emotional, convincing three-dimensional scenes. It's incredible.
And the most fundamental trick art uses is the depth illusion.
Right, making flat things look deep.
Artists use all sorts of cues, linear perspective, overlapping shapes, changes in size to fool our visual system into perceiving 3D space on a 2D plane. Renaissance masters didn't just guess this stuff, they studied geometry, light.
Like Leonardo da Vinci in Sfumato, that hazy look.
Exactly. Using soft, subtle transitions between tones creates atmospheric perspective, making distant things look lighter, less distinct. Or chiaroscuro.
The dramatic light and shadow.
Right, gives figures that sculpted 3D presence on a flat canvas. These are precise techniques designed to feed the visual cues your brain already expects from the real world.
So it generates this immediate, automatic, and technically false sense of depth.
Art also taps into our deep, innate need for pattern and meaning. Humans are fundamentally pattern-seeking creatures.
Why is that?
Evolution, probably. We need to find structure, even in randomness, so we can predict what might happen next. It helps us survive.
And artists guide this tendency.
They arrange lines, colors, sounds, so the mind automatically organizes the sensory data into coherent, meaningful wholes. We can't help but try to make sense of it.
This sounds like where pareidolia comes in, seeing faces and things.
Exactly. Our hypersensitivity to seeing living forms. We see faces in clouds, animals in rocks, figures in wood grain.
Because the brain circuits for detecting faces and living things are just always on high alert.
Pretty much. So an artist like Rembrandt, in a complex etching, can use just a few squiggles, some visual noise.
And boom, you see a person.
You immediately perceive a fully formed, sentient person in that visual chaos. It's activated by mere suggestion, exploiting that built-in bias.
And this connects to teleological thinking, too. The idea that things have purpose.
Yeah, the instinct to assume that events and objects have purpose and intention behind them. This bias is also likely rooted in survival. You assume the bush rustled for a reason, maybe a predator?
And that sticks with us.
It persists. Think about Deborah Kellerman's research with kids. Ask them why rocks are pointy.
They don't say geology.
No, they say things like, so animals won't sit on them, or so water can run off. They automatically infer design, agency, purpose, even where none exists.
And this bias deeply influences how we look at art, right?
Yeah.
We assume the artist intended every brushstroke, every note to mean something specific.
We project intention onto it. And tied into this pattern seeking is the principle of the implied whole.
Filling in the blanks.
Our brains don't just process what's actually there. They automatically construct what's missing to maintain a coherent picture. If you only see the head and shoulders of the Mona Lisa.
Your brain just finishes the rest of her body, even though it's not painted.
Instantly. We do it constantly in daily life. See someone half hidden by a door, you don't assume they stop existing at the doorframe.
Right, your brain fills in the rest. Martin Scorsese talked about this in film, didn't he?
He did. He said something like, cinema is a matter of what's in the frame and what's out. The real art happens when the viewer's imagination supplies the rest, guided by what the artist does show.
And then we project minds onto these imagined forms using theory of mind.
Exactly. We evolved to recognize that other humans have minds, intentions, feelings, but we apply this anthropomorphic impulse super broadly.
Like naming cars, talking to computers.
Feeling affection for pets, viewing nature as Mother Earth. We project sentience everywhere.
So in art, we respond to figures in paintings or sculptures as if they were actually sentient.
We do. The source material mentions viewing Degas' bronze sculpture, Little Dancer, 14 years. When we look at her,
We feel like we know her.
the same neurology that processes real human interaction lights up. We feel her fatigue, her intention, her story, even though she's just bronze and fabric. Art leverages our hardwiring to project a complex mind onto simple matter.
Creating this deep emotional connection that is, strictly speaking, an illusion.
A powerful, meaningful illusion. Hashtag Ted for Hervé. The emotional versus intellectual modes of knowing.
Okay, this intense projection of emotion and sentience, it brings us right to the core of how humans process meaning, doesn't it? These two competing ways of knowing.
The emotional versus the intellectual.
Yeah.
The classic head versus the heart.
And this is where we really bump up against the limits of human knowledge.
Absolutely. Because deep thinkers throughout history, they've realized that when you're grappling with the big questions, metaphysical, aesthetic, moral questions, these two paths often give you different answers.
Sometimes mutually exclusive answers.
Which really demonstrates the inherent limits of our cognition. We can hold conflicting truths depending on which system is dominant.
So the intellectual mode, that's the one that translates reality.
Right. It creates the artificial constructs we rely on, categories, language, math, the linear idea of time. We use it to organize the chaos of the universe into neat, manageable symbols.
But we have to remember we're understanding the translation, the map.
Not the raw territory itself. It's functionally useful, essential even, but it's not the raw reality.
And the emotional mode.
That's more holistic, intuitive, often irrational if you judge it by logic standards. But while it's integral to reason, it's absolutely essential for dealing with concepts that are fundamentally beyond objective description and logic.
Like morality, metaphysics.
Aesthetics, the meaning of beauty, the power of art.
And this emotional mode often kicks in when the logical, categorizing brain quiets down.
That seems to be the case. This neurological shift happens during experiences of profound art or experiencing awe in nature, maybe spiritual or mystical states, even altered consciousness.
So sacred art, like mandalas or altarpieces, might be designed specifically for that.
It often seems intentionally designed to quiet the ordinary, chattering, logical brain and let the emotional, intuitive brain take the lead in perception.
And neuroscience actually backs this up, this link between aesthetics and transcendence.
It does. Samir Zaki's work on the neurobiology of beauty shows that encountering powerful art affects the brain in ways similar to mystical experiences. Key areas linked to emotion, reward, meaning the amygdala, dopamine circuits, they become highly active.
The same areas involved in love or spiritual awe.
Exactly. And even more, research by Vessel and Chatterjee found that during these profound aesthetic moments, the brain regions tied to self-focus actually quiet down.
The ego gets smaller.
In a sense, yes. And that produces that feeling of vastness, wonder, connection to something larger than yourself. It helps explain that meditative, almost spiritual feeling you can get from great art or nature.
Awe has a distinct neurological signature that silences the self momentarily.
Yeah, allowing a sense of transcendence and unity, and this reliance on the emotional, intuitive mode. It's deeply tied to our nature as storytellers and metaphor makers.
We don't see reality as just raw data.
No, we perceive it as ordered narratives. We impose an artificial structure, cause and effect, beginning, middle, end. Narrative thinking is built into our prediction machine brains. We're desperate to know what happens next to make sense of the sequence.
And metaphor is fundamental to this, not just decoration.
Absolutely not just decoration. Cognitive scientists Lakoff and Johnson showed it's a foundation of thought. We use familiar physical terms all the time to map abstract ideas.
Like time flowing or grasping an idea.
Seeing life as a journey, we need these physical anchors to navigate abstract concepts.
And even our sense of self, our identity, is basically a story.
Fundamentally, yes. As Daniel Dennett suggested, consciousness itself is largely a story the brain continuously tells about itself. We're constantly reconstructing, highlighting some bits, omitting others.
Editing our own autobiography to maintain a coherent self-image we can live with.
Exactly, to make sense of our choices and actions.
But this reliance on storytelling, while it's essential for identity and function, it's also a huge cognitive vulnerability, isn't it?
Massive. Because the brain, driven by that need for speed and survival, prefers coherence over accuracy.
It wants the story to hang together, even if it means fudging the details.
It will automatically fill narrative gaps with assumptions, distortions, biases, sometimes even outright false memories, just to make the story feel complete and functional.
Which makes us incredibly vulnerable to, well, manipulation.
To emotionally charged narratives, misinformation, propaganda, anything that uses the power of art, music, film, story to bypass our critical faculties and manipulate our beliefs.
So art, by harnessing this fundamental narrative power, operates in this really powerful, sometimes fraught, maybe even untruthful space where emotion can easily override fact.
Precisely. It taps right into that core mechanism. #V, the power of frames and the definition of beauty.
Okay, this need for coherence, for order, it brings us to another critical factor that shapes our aesthetic experience.
Right.
The idea of frames.
Right, frames. Whether they're literal picture frames or figurative expectations, they silently guide our perception in almost every aspect of life.
Give us an example.
Okay, think about an object. If you see it hanging in an ornate, gilded frame in a hushed museum.
It immediately signals, this is art, pay attention, it has value.
Exactly. Now take that exact same physical object, unframe it, put it on a dusty table at a garage sale among chipped mugs.
You'd probably ignore it, or haggle over 50 cents.
Right. The object didn't change, but the frame completely changed its perceived meaning, its value, how you interact with it.
And the museum itself is a massive frame.
Yeah.
The quiet, the ticket price, the way you're supposed to behave.
All signals for how to look and what to feel. We absorb these cultural conventions, how to act at a symphony versus a rock concert. They become second nature. We're natural, compliant frame learners.
And art relies on these shared frames to even communicate, doesn't it?
Heavily. A film or a song needs familiar cues, genre conventions, a structure for us to even understand it. If an artist just threw out all the rules arbitrarily.
It wouldn't be revolutionary, it would just be noise.
Yeah.
Incomprehensible.
Exactly. You need a shared background, an accepted structure for innovation to even register as innovation. You have to break from something.
And sometimes artists deliberately violate these frames,
Okay.
right? To shock us out of just passively accepting them.
Oh, absolutely. The source material gives that incredible example from the TV show MAAs back in the 70s.
Right, the comedy show set during the Korean War.
Yeah, reliably built on jokes, hijinks, always had a laugh track. You knew what to expect. But then in this one pivotal episode, the beloved character, Colonel Henry Blake.
He's killed, suddenly, casually, in a plane crash off screen at the very end.
And it shattered the show's own comedic frame. The audience was stunned, even angry.
But it was intentional.
Completely intentional and incredibly profound. MA was underneath the jokes about the Korean War, where death and tragedy were constant realities. By breaking that expected comedic rhythm so brutally.
It forced viewers to confront the actual tragedy of war in a way that was maybe more visceral, more shocking than if it had happened in a straightforward drama.
Exactly. That violation of expectation made the dramatic point land with incredible force. It's a powerful artistic technique, forcing a confrontation with reality by breaking the frame.
So contemplating these frames, becoming aware of them, it sharpens our thinking. Not just about art, but everywhere.
Definitely. We need to ask ourselves regularly, what am I missing because of the frame I'm using? How might my understanding change if I looked at this from a completely different perspective?
Thomas Kuhn talked about this in Science, right?
Yeah.
Paradigm shifts happen when we break old conceptual structures.
Exactly. It's not always just about new data, it's about new ways of seeing. Which brings us to maybe the most historically contentious frame of all.
The definition of beauty.
Ugh, beauty. For centuries, it felt like art had to be beautiful, harmonious, maybe morally uplifting. But does art stop being art if it's unsettling, discordant, even overtly ugly?
Philosophically, the answer seems to be a clear no, right?
A resounding no. If you restrict art only to what's conventionally beautiful or virtuous, you exclude the sublime.
The sublime, what's that again?
It's that which is transcendent, mind-expanding, but not necessarily pretty. It can inspire feelings of awe, yes, but also terror, discomfort, shock. Think of a massive storm or deep space.
Things that overwhelm us.
Exactly. If we insist art must only be beautiful in the simple sense, we cut out huge essential dimensions of human experience, torment, tragedy, chaos. We just have to invent another word for powerful works that aren't nice.
And the sublime is important because it pushes our limits.
It stretches our cognitive and emotional boundaries. It confronts us with something vast, overwhelming, maybe profoundly disturbing, and it often mixes pain and pleasure. Plus, beauty itself is incredibly subjective.
And cultural. What one era finds beautiful, another might find ugly.
Totally. And what seems ugly or amateurish at first might just be unfamiliar. Think about the initial reactions to Van Gogh or Renoir, often dismissed.
Or the music of Stravinsky, Prokofiev, called harsh, jarring.
Even Beethoven's Third Symphony was considered offensive, too complex by some contemporaries. The frame of what counts as beautiful is constantly shifting based on exposure and cultural acceptance.
Which is why artists like Picasso and Duchamp deliberately stepped outside that beauty frame entirely.
Right. Picasso said his focus often wasn't on beauty, but on philosophical problems like how do you show time passing or all sides of an object on a flat canvas.
So for him, critics arguing if it was beautiful or ugly were just missing the point.
Completely missing the philosophical investigation he was undertaking. And Duchamp with Fountain, that was the ultimate challenge to the beauty frame.
By presenting a found object, a urinal, as art.
He shifted the whole conversation, away from the centuries-old focus on craftsmanship and aesthetic pleasure.
Towards the artist's choice, the concept, the intention.
Exactly. That act blew the doors open for conceptual art and permanently questioned the authority of the institution to decide what art is based on looks alone.
So for works that explore really dark stuff, like Munch's The Scream or, say, Hubert Selby Jr.'s novels,
asking if they're beautiful is just irrelevant. Their power, their profundity lies in their unflinching honesty about difficult, complex human emotions. Beauty isn't the point.
Okay. So art is built on illusion. The brain is biased towards coherence, not truth. The frames we use are arbitrary and cultural. It kind of leaves us with a big question.
Who actually decides what an artwork means?
Yeah. Where does the meaning come from?
Well, the meaning seems to emerge from this complex interplay, really, of four main factors.
Okay, what are they?
You got the artist's initial intent, whatever that might have been, then the artist's biography and the historical context they worked in, then the work's formal qualities, the actual lines, shapes, sounds, words, and finally, maybe most powerfully,
The audience's response.
the audience's subjective response, what's often called reader response theory. The meaning gets co-created in that interaction.
Which explains why influential artists like Mark Rothko, with those big abstract color fields,
Or David Lynch with his surreal films.
why they often resisted giving definitive explanations of their work.
Exactly. Because the power of the artwork often lies precisely in its capacity to support multiple, even contradictory interpretations.
A single play can be seen as political by one person, psychological by another, spiritual by a third.
Across different time periods even, and none of those readings necessarily cancels the others out. That openness is key to art's staying power, its ability to remain relevant.
And that inherent openness, that explains why your personal response to a piece of art is uniquely valid.
Absolutely. Your reaction is this incredibly complex mix. Your temperament, your culture, your biology, your upbringing, it all feeds in.
Like personality traits. Studies show those influence taste.
Strongly. People who score high on openness, curiosity, they're often drawn to abstract, unconventional art that breaks rules.
While people who prefer stability, order,
Tend to gravitate towards more balanced, harmonious, classically structured works. It resonates with their psychological makeup.
and culture shapes taste profoundly, often without us even realizing it.
Oh, deeply. Think about historical differences. Western art often prized realism for centuries, while traditional East Asian art might value simplicity, suggestion, negative space, much more.
Even the symbolism of colors is totally cultural.
Right. Black means mourning in the West, often, but white is used for grief in many East Asian cultures. Red means joy in China. These frames are learned so early, they feel natural, and they shape our instant emotional responses.
And finally, biology itself plays a role, like how our brains are wired.
Yeah, down to the neurological level, people literally perceive colors and hear sounds slightly differently based on their individual wiring. And beyond that, the source material notes something fascinating.
Which is,
That neurological differences, things sometimes seen as disorders, can actually enhance creativity and lead to revolutionary art.
like bipolar disorder being linked to artists like Van Gogh or Schumann.
Their intense emotionality and drive, yeah. Or synesthesia, the blending of senses, like seeing colors when hearing music.
That directly inspired Kandinsky, his abstract, painted music.
Exactly. These examples show that revolutionary art often emerges from brains that perceive the world differently. And different art styles naturally appeal to different ways of thinking.
So art appreciation isn't about finding the one right answer.
Not at all. It's about engaging the full complexity of our own cognitive machinery.
Ultimately, then, looking at how we perceive art. It's maybe the most profound illustration of human cognition itself.
It really is. It shows us our amazing physiological abilities, sure, but maybe more importantly, it highlights our limitations.
The fact that we're designed to favor function, coherence, over objective fact.
And so what does this all really mean? The simple fact that we can be affected, deeply, viscerally affected by the fake of art.
By pigment on cloth, sound waves, flickering light.
Sometimes even more profoundly than we're affected by actual physical reality itself. That says something absolutely crucial about the reliability or maybe the nature of human thinking.
Artworks become these powerful artifacts then, showing us not just beauty, but showing us ourselves,
Yes.
our own minds.
Our minds at work, our abilities, our biases, our limits, showing that our emotional, intuitive paths to meaning, while maybe based on a dubious notion of truth, are absolutely essential for human purpose, connection, and maybe even survival.
So we've spent this deep dive exploring how our survival-oriented brains rely on functional false beliefs, on ambiguity, on manufactured stories, just to get through the day efficiently and coherently.
We seem to need illusion to function.
So if we accept that, we want to leave you, the listener, with this reflective question. What essential lie, or maybe just arbitrary frame, are you currently relying on in your own daily life? Maybe in your work, your sense of identity, your relationships. Something that, on some level isn't strictly true, but is actually helping you achieve a positive and necessary goal.